This gown was most popular in the 1770s until the French Revolution in 1789. A typical outfit started out with the undergarments, just as we do today. Women would wear knee-high stockings held up by ribbons, a shift, which is a simple underdress, and a corset known as stays in the 18th century. The hips are given structure by the paniers, French for baskets. Women would have pockets in their dresses as well, where they would often keep a fan for the stifling heat at court, smelling salts to revive them if they ever fainted, and perfume. Then, the under petticoat is secured, made of quilted fabric or cotton, to hide the lines from the panier's boning. This is a very warm layer, which is tough in summer, but provides much-needed warmth for women in winter. In general, women would wear 3 to 5 petticoats with most of these historical gowns, which is a quantity of under petticoats that I didn't have the time, the fabric, or the money to make. Finally, the petticoat, or our equivalent of a skirt, goes on bottom. This is followed by a top, a sort of jacket, that you lace up. This jacket, called the pet en l'air, is shorter. It doesn't have a train and was therefore worn as a day dress. Finally, you attach the stomacher to the dress, which hides the front lacing. Historically, women would pin their stomachers to their stays, which hinders mobility because of how temporary it is. While it's technically possible to put all these layers on by yourself, it's incredibly difficult and almost a workout in and of itself. The rich women who were forced to wear these gowns to follow the status quo, known as the etiquette, were dependent on help from servants or husbands to even get dressed or undressed. Imagine being so reliant on others. Because of that, it's important to note that working-class women would wear clothes that were much more mobile. They did wear stays, the corset's precursor. However, they didn't tighten them that much, so they basically just provided back support. This day dress is known as the pet en l'air, which literally means fart in the air, because of the volume that the back pleating creates when it catches air currents. A pet en l'air with a longer train is referred to as a robe, a dress, à la française. These gowns were worn for more formal or evening occasions, often at Versailles. It took me 55 hours to make all the layers of this dress. Nowadays, clothes don't discriminate as much based on wealth. Our modern equivalent to these gowns are designer items like Gucci or Prada. However, even if you can't afford real designer items, it's easy to find fake ones that look real. Back in the 1770s, however, you couldn't fake the 9 meters of fabric needed to make the back pleating of this dress. Clothes were a mark of social status, something that was almost impossible to fake. Not only could the majority of the population not afford this amount of fabric, but there were laws called sumptuary laws that prevented non-nobles from wearing certain colors or fabrics, like silk or brocade. Thus, fashion became a tool used by noble women to express wealth and gain power. I used a historically accurate thick brocade to make this dress. It was so difficult to work with and thick that I broke 3 needles while sewing it. Marie Antoinette hated the expensive, cumbersome gowns she had to wear at court. So whenever she went to her private estates, she wore lighter, simpler gowns that required less fabric. Marie Antoinette used fashion as a tool to rebel against the French nobility's traditions, and for that she was reviled. The peasants thought of her as frivolous for spending so much money on these dresses she was forced to wear, while the nobility hated her for trying to change the status quo. Also, textile manufacturers hated her for trying to simplify clothing, which would reduce their market. No matter what she did, Marie Antoinette was vilified for her clothes. Fashion ended up being one of the biggest weapons used against her by all parties involved in the French Revolution. Fashion imprisoned Marie Antoinette in her cage within the French monarchy. It comes as no surprise that in response to the French Revolution, clothes became simplified in order to allow the French nobility to blend in with the bourgeois class. Upper-class women also had increased mobility. Without cumbersome paniers, they could do things like walk through doors straight on. These are called empire-waisted dresses after their origin in Napoleon's empire from 1792 to the late 1810s. They are commonly referred to as Regency gowns, as they are worn in all of our favorite Jane Austen stories when England had a Prince Regent. I find it fascinating how dresses went from requiring insane amounts of fabric and structure to this simple silhouette. These dresses truly are a fashion anomaly provoked by the French Revolution and a scared nobility. The Empress Eugénie, renowned for her involvement in her husband Napoleon III's government and her trend-setting fashion, brought large yet lightweight crinolines back into style. Eugénie faced a lot of criticism from the French, being insulted as the Spaniard, just as Marie Antoinette was called the Austrian. Eugénie morbidly believed she would suffer the same fate as Marie Antoinette. While the Second Empire was thriving in France, the Victorian era was in full swing in England. This era was characteristic of the tiny waist. Fainting couches were invented because so many women tightened their corsets too much, too quickly, causing them to faint. In the 1890s, large bustles returned in style in order to stimulate the French textile industry because large bustles require many extra yards of fabric. This higher neckline top would be worn during the day because it's more modest. While both men and women have been making and designing clothes for centuries, it's predominantly men's voices and ideas that are printed, reproduced, and heard. Charles Worth was the genius behind most trends in the late 19th century. Nowadays, many of the biggest brands like Dior and McQueen are designed or run by men. Men didn't have to wear the tiny slippers they made for women. Men didn't have to wear the layers of petticoats and corsets, and yet they were the ones to design and make them. Today, women all know the struggle of uncomfortable high heels or the lack of pockets in clothes, as fashion continues to be heavily influenced by men. This lower-cut top with short poofy sleeves would be worn in the evening to an event. This was the first top where I felt comfortable enough to use the same pattern as the day top and actually alter it myself, according to research. Over the next half-century, corsets will go out of style as women internalize them. No longer does a garment shape our body or our waist. Society has now taught women to strive to reach that shape in our bodies ourselves, through things like diet, exercise, or even plastic surgery. How have you internalized your corset?